Is this a joke? The words, slick with contempt, slithered from the bench and coiled in the suffocating air of the courtroom. Judge Marcus Thorne leaned forward, his black robes rustling like the wings of some. He peered down from his perch of polished mahogany, his face a mask of theatrical disbelief. They thought it was over, but they had no idea this woman was about to rewrite the law. The air in courtroom 4B was a stagnant, heavy thing, thick with the scent of old paper floor wax and the quiet desperation of lives hanging in the balance. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, struggled through the tall, arched windows, laying pale stripes across the worn wooden benches. Every sound was amplified: the nervous cough of a spectator, the squeak of a bailiff's leather holster, the incessant, low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It was a cathedral built for judgment, and Judge Thorne was its high priest. At the stenotype machine sat Aelia Vance. To the casual observer, she was just another part of the room's furniture. Her attire was deliberately forgettable: a simple charcoal blazer, a plain white blouse, gray slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, efficient bun. Nothing about her invited a second glance. She was a function, a mechanism for recording the proceedings, as inanimate as the microphone on the witness stand. But beneath that placid, professional exterior, Aelia's mind was a maelstrom of controlled fury. Her heart did not race. Her hands did not tremble. Instead, a cold, dense singularity of purpose had settled deep in her core, a block of ice in the furnace of her stomach. Her fingers, light and sure, danced across the keys of the steno machine, each press a silent vow. She was not merely transcribing words, she was forging a weapon. At the defendant's table sat her entire world. David Vance wore an ill-fitting suit provided by the public defender's office. It hung on his strong frame, a costume meant to convey a humility he already possessed. He was a good man, a community organizer who had spent his life building bridges in a city determined to tear them down. He had been framed, expertly and viciously, for a crime of financial fraud. He could not. The evidence against him was a tapestry of lies woven by corrupt officers, all blessed by the prosecutor who now preened beside the state's flag. Across the room, the architect of this misery held court. Judge Marcus Thorne was a man who wore his authority like a second skin. His robes were tailored, his silver hair was perfect, and the gold cufflinks that peeked from his sleeves glinted with smug satisfaction. He looked at David, not as a man to be judged, but as a pest to be exterminated. Thorne saw the faded hope in the eyes of David's mother in the front row, the fear on the public defender's face, and he fed on it. It was his ambrosia. Thorne cleared his throat, a theatrical rumble that drew all eyes. He picked up the sentencing report, holding it between two fingers as if it were a soiled napkin. "David Vance," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You stand before this court convicted of conspiracy and fraud, crimes that tear at the very fabric of our financial institutions." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But it is more than that," Thorne continued, his gaze sweeping over the gallery, a preacher warming to his sermon. "It is an attitude, a rot, a belief among certain elements of our society that the rules do not apply to them, that they can take what is not theirs." Aelia's fingers never stopped tap, tap, tap. Each syllable of Thorne's poisoned speech was captured, preserved, entered into the record that would become his doom. From his elevated bench, Thorne felt the familiar surge of power. He was the law. In this room, his will was absolute. He saw the defendant, this community organizer, and saw only a thug in a cheap suit. He saw the man's family, their dark faces etched with worry, and felt nothing but disdain. They were a blight, and he was the righteous flame sent to purify the city. He believed this. "You have shown no remorse," Thorn declared, his voice rising. "You have maintained this fiction of innocence, this arrogant defiance throughout the proceedings." He slammed the report down on his desk. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. "It is the duty of this court to send a message that will be heard in every corner of this city. We will not tolerate this behavior. We will not allow our way of life to be undermined by predators." Aaliyah met her husband's eyes for a fleeting second. David's gaze was steady. It held no fear, only love and an unshakable trust that broke her heart and fortified her resolve in the same instant. He knew the plan, he knew the cost. Therefore Judge Thorn boomed, savoring the finality of the moment. "Pursuant to the statutes of this state, this court sentences you, David Vance, to the maximum term allowed by law." A strangled sob escaped David's mother. 20 years in a state penitentiary. The sentence fell like a guillotine. The air rushed out of the room. The public defender slumped, defeated. David's mother broke into quiet, racking sobs. But David Vance did not break. He stood straighter. He squared his shoulders. He looked directly at Judge Thorn, his expression one of profound, sorrowful pity. This silent defiance was more than Thorn could bear. It was an intolerable affront to his authority. He expected begging. He expected the satisfying crack of a man's spirit. He got none of it. "And let me be clear," Thorn snarled, leaning over the bench, his face contorted in a mask of pure malice. "You will serve every last day. Let this be a lesson to all of you people. Your kind does not belong in civilized society." It was the final overreach, the last fatal brick in the edifice of his own destruction. A direct, recorded, undeniable violation of judicial canon. Aaliyah's fingers typed the final words of his tirade, "civilized society." Period. Thorn, basking in the afterglow of his pronouncement, banged his gavel. "This court is adieu." Scrape. The sound was jarring, alien, the harsh drag of a wooden chair leg against the linoleum floor. Every head turned. Aaliyah Vance was on her feet. Her face was no longer a mask of professional neutrality. It was transformed. The quiet, unassuming court reporter was gone. In her place stood a woman radiating an aura of cold, lethal authority. Her posture was ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on Judge Thorn with an intensity that made him physically recoil. The bailiffs tensed. The prosecutor stared, mouth agape. David's public defender looked on in utter confusion. Judge Thorn's face cycled through surprise, then confusion, and finally, apoplectic rage. He was a king whose servant had just spat on his throne. "Court reporter," he barked, his voice a whip crack. "You are out of order. Sit down immediately, or I will have you held in contempt." Aaliyah did not move. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring courtroom like a surgeon's scalpel. It was calm, precise, and utterly devoid of fear. "I cannot do that, Your Honor." Thorn's jaw tightened. The veins on his temple began to throb. "You cannot. I am the judge in this courtroom. I command you to sit down." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Aaliyah said, her voice dropping a fraction, becoming even more controlled, more dangerous. "Your command of this courtroom is precisely the issue at hand." The sheer audacity of it left Thorn momentarily speechless. He was the predator. He was the one who held all the power. Yet, for the first time in his long tyrannical career, he felt a sliver of ice slide down his spine. This woman was not afraid of him. Why was she not afraid? "You have one final chance," Woman? He hissed, his professional facade crumbling to reveal the raw bully beneath. Sit down. No, Aaliyah said simply. The word hung in the air. A declaration of war. Thorne's mind raced. He had her now. Contempt of court. Obstruction. He would bury her. Bailiffs, he roared, pointing a trembling finger. Take this woman into custody. The two bailiffs started to move, their expressions a mixture of reluctance and duty. I would advise against that, Aaliyah said, her gaze never leaving Thorne's. Her voice remained terrifyingly quiet. Because the man you just illegally and unethically sentenced, in clear violation of Canon 2, Rule 2.3 of the Code of Judicial Conduct, is my husband. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. It was a bombshell, and the fallout was immediate. Chaotic silence. David's mother stared, her tear-streaked face a portrait of shock. The prosecutor's jaw dropped so far, it nearly touched his chest. His mind, usually so quick to find the cruelest angle, struggled to process the information. The court reporter, the quiet little mouse in the corner, married to the defendant. Then, the implications hit him, and a cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. He had her. Oh, he had her, completely. Is this a joke? He sneered, the words from the story's opening now dripping with venomous victory. You sat through this entire trial, this entire proceeding, and failed to disclose a direct conflict of interest. You have compromised the integrity of this entire case. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Not only are you fired, but I will see to it personally that you are disbarred. You will never work in any legal capacity in this state again. You have just handed me the very grounds to make this conviction ironclad, on appeal. He leaned back in his chair, smug and victorious. He had weathered the bizarre interruption and turned it to his advantage. He had crushed the defendant and was now about to crush his insolent wife. It was a perfect day. Aaliyah watched him, her expression unreadable. She let his tirade finish, let his confidence reach its absolute peak. She let him build his own gallows. Then she spoke again, her voice soft, lethal. That might be a problem, Your Honor. Oh, and why is that, little girl? He mocked. Because I am not a member of the state bar, Aaliyah stated calmly. Thorne's smile faltered. What? And you cannot fire me, she continued. She reached into the inner pocket of her charcoal blazer, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She produced a small, leather wallet. She flipped it open. The courtroom was so quiet that the click of the wallet opening was audible in the back row. My name is Special Agent Aaliyah Vance, she announced, her voice ringing with an authority that dwarfed Thorne's own. I am a federal officer with the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. She held up her credentials. The golden eagle and shield seemed to catch every stray beam of light in the room, blazing with righteous power. And you, Judge Thorne, she said, her eyes locking onto his, have been the primary subject of a 16-month federal investigation into judicial corruption, codenamed Operation Gavel Fall. Your courtroom, sir, has been a federal crime scene for the last 3 weeks. The color drained from Marcus Thorne's face. It happened in an instant. The ruddy, confident complexion vanished, replaced by a pasty. A fine sheen of sweat popped out on his forehead. His sneer collapsed into a slack-jawed mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The world had just tilted on its axis, and he was in free fall. He stared at the badge, then at Aaliyah's face. The quiet, mousy court reporter was gone. He saw her now for what she was, a hunter, and he was the prey. He had been walking through her snare for months. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. 3 figures stepped through, their silhouettes framed by the bright light of the hallway. The man in the center was Elias Vance, Aaliyah's brother-in-law, and her handler from the DOJ. Flanking him were two uniformed United States Marshals, their faces grim and impassive. But it was the fourth figure that made Thorne's blood run cold. Walking beside Elias was Chief Judge Elena Sandoval, the presiding judge of the state's highest appellate court, a woman of unimpeachable integrity and legendary sternness. A woman Thorne had both feared and privately mocked for years. She was here. In his courtroom, the entire room rose to its feet in a clatter of motion, a reflexive act of deference to Judge Sandoval's authority. All except for Marcus Thorne, who seemed to have been fused to his chair, paralyzed by a terror so profound it had stolen the strength from his limbs. Elias and the marshals advanced down the center aisle, their footsteps echoing like a funeral drum. Judge Sandoval followed, her gaze fixed on Thorne, her expression one of glacial disappointment. They stopped at the bar. Elias looked at Aaliyah and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a nod that said, "It's dumb. You did it." Judge Sandoval addressed the stunned courtroom. "Everyone, please be seated." The use of his first name was a deliberate, brutal blow. It stripped him of his title, of his power, of his identity. He was no longer Judge Thorne. He was just Marcus, a criminal. Sandoval turned her attention to Thorne, her voice ringing with the cold clarity of a judgment bell. "For 10 years, Marcus, you have been a cancer on this judiciary. We have been inundated with complaints, with appeals citing bias, with whispers of backroom deals and blatant prejudice. But you were clever. You covered your tracks. You intimidated witnesses and colleagues alike." She gestured toward Aaliyah. "But you never imagined that the system you so gleefully corrupted would one day place its most dedicated agent right under your nose. You never imagined that the meek little court reporter you ignored every day was meticulously documenting every one of your crimes." Thorne finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, reedy squeak. "This is an outrage, a setup. You have no proof." "Oh, but we do," Elias said, stepping forward. He held up a small digital audio recorder. Special Agent Vance was not just a stenographer. She was a walking recording. He pressed a button. "A lesson to all of you people. Your kind does not belong in civilized society." Thorne's own voice, distorted and venomous, filled the courtroom. It was his judicial death sentence, played back for all to hear. "That is a direct violation of Canon 2, Rule 2.3, by," Judge Sandoval stated, her voice like cracking ice, "which prohibits a judge from manifesting bias or prejudice." Elias nodded to the marshals. "Marcus Thorne, you are under arrest for conspiracy to deprive rights, under color of law, in violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 241, bribery, in violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 201. The marshals moved past the bar and ascended the steps to the bench. It was a sacrilege, an invasion of the sacred space that Thorne had considered his personal kingdom. One of the marshals, a tall, imposing man, reached out and gently took the gavel from the desk where Thorne had slammed it down in triumph only moments before. He laid it carefully on its side. The symbol of Thorne's power was officially neutralized. The second, Marshall produced a pair of steel handcuffs. The soft click-click, as he unlocked them, was the loudest sound Thorne had ever heard. "Stand up, sir," the marshal said, his voice polite but unyielding. Thorne didn't move. He was staring at Aaliyah, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The husband, the trial. The entire case had been a carefully constructed trap, and he, the master manipulator, had walked right into it, with his eyes wide open, blinded by his own arrogance. She played me, he whispered, the words barely audible. She used her own husband. Aaliyah's expression remained impassive, but her eyes blazed. My husband is an innocent man. You and your cronies framed to clear a path for a lucrative property deal you were getting kickbacks on. He agreed to see this through because he knew it was the only way to stop you from destroying countless other innocent lives. He is a hero. You are just a corrupt, petty tyrant in a black robe. The marshals grabbed Thorne by his upper arms and hauled him to his feet. They pulled his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. Click, clack. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. As they began to lead him down from the bench, a broken and defeated man, he passed Aaliyah. He stopped, his face a twisted mess of hatred and disbelief. You, he spat, his voice a venomous rasp. Aaliyah looked him dead in the eye. Her voice dropped to a whisper, a sound meant only for him, a final, perfectly placed dagger. You once told your clerk, who was a federal informant, by the way, that the law was yours to command, she said softly. You were wrong. The law is a shield for the innocent. You used it as a sword against the weak. And today, Judge, you finally fell on it. His face crumpled. That was the blow that finally broke him. They led him away, a stooped, shuffling figure in a wrinkled black robe, the clinking of his handcuffs the only sound accompanying his walk of shame. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as the once mighty Judge Marcus Thorne was escorted out of his own kingdom like a common criminal. The moment the doors closed behind him, Judge Sandoval struck the bench with her own borrowed gavel. The illegal sentence imposed upon Mr. David Vance is hereby vacated. All charges are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Vance, you are a free man. A cheer erupted from the gallery. David's mother wept, but this time her tears were of overwhelming joy and relief. David walked over to the steno machine, to the place where his wife had just saved his life and redeemed the very idea of justice. He pulled her into his arms, and in the middle of the chaotic, jubilant courtroom, Aaliyah Vance finally allowed herself to feel. She buried her face in his shoulder, and for the first time in 16 months, the block of ice in her core began to melt. The fallout was a nuclear winter for Marcus Thorne and his entire corrupt network. The story exploded across the nation. DOJ's covert court rotter grinds down. King Ping Ping Pine Jed Jidge, screamed one headline. Operation Gavel Fall. How Juan agents L love for her. Husband Cleanesta Saituats, read another. Thorne's mugshot, a portrait of defeated arrogance, was plastered on every news channel and website. He was denied bail, deemed a flight risk, and a danger to the community he had once sworn to protect. His assets, accrued through years of bribery and extortion, were frozen. His powerful friends, the politicians and businessmen who had benefited from his twisted justice, abandoned him overnight, issuing press releases condemning his actions and feigning shock. They scattered like roaches when the lights came on. The investigation that Aaliyah had spearheaded unraveled a vast conspiracy. The two police detectives who had framed David were arrested within hours of Thorne's downfall. They confessed immediately, hoping for leniency, and gave up the prosecutor, who was taken into custody in the middle of a celebratory lunch. The property developers, the bagmen, the clerks on the take one by one. The dominoes fell. Thorne's legal career was obliterated. He was disbarred in a special emergency hearing. His name was literally scraped from the brass plaque outside the courthouse. His judicial pension was revoked. His wife of 30 years filed for divorce the day after his arrest, citing irreconcilable moral differences and a desire to protect her own assets. facing an ironclad case built on months of audio recordings, sworn testimony from his own staff, and a mountain of financial evidence, Thorne was advised to take a plea deal. But his hubris, the very flaw that had led to his ruin, made one final fatal appearance. He fired his high-priced lawyers, convinced he could outsmart the federal government. He chose to represent himself. The trial was a masterclass in prosecutorial excellence and a tragicomedy of self-defeating arrogance. Thorne, stripped of his robes and his power, was just an angry, sputtering old man. He was convicted on all counts in less than 2 hours of jury deliberation. At his sentencing, a new judge, a stern but fair woman, appointed to clean up his mess, looked down at him and sentenced him to 30 years in federal prison. No parole, but the impact went far beyond one man's ruin. Judge Sandoval, empowered by the federal investigation, launched a full-scale review of every single criminal case Marcus Thorne had presided over in the past decade. The results were horrifying. Hundreds of convictions, primarily of poor and minority defendants, were found to be tainted by judicial bias, procedural misconduct, or outright fabrication of evidence. Dozens of people were released from prison, their names cleared, their stolen years a testament to the depth of Thorne's corruption. The city was forced to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in wrongful conviction settlements. New protocols were implemented. A robust judicial oversight committee with real teeth was established. The system, wounded and shamed, began the slow, painful process of healing itself, all because one woman had been willing to become a ghost within its walls. 6 months later, the view from Aliyah Vance's new office was of the United States Capitol building. The Washington, D.C. air was crisp and cool. She had been promoted, brought back to headquarters to lead a new special task force dedicated to rooting out judicial corruption nationwide. Her success with Operation Gavel Fall had made her a legend within the Department of Justice. David stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. His exoneration had made him a powerful voice for reform. He now ran a national foundation, funded by a substantial grant, advocating for the wrongfully convicted. They had taken the worst moment of their lives and forged it into a shared purpose. Her office phone rang. She picked it up. Vance, it was Judge Sandoval. Her voice was warm. Aliyah, I just wanted to call and thank you again. We seated the new oversight board today. It's a new day for this city's justice system. Aliyah smiled, a genuine relaxed smile that had been absent from her face for too long. You gave us the support we needed. Nonsense, Sandoval replied. You took the risk. You and your husband. I just read that Marcus Thorne arrived at the federal Supermax facility today. It seems fitting. Aliyah looked out at the marble dome of the Capitol, the symbol of the law she had fought so hard to uphold. A robe doesn't make you a king, Your Honor, she said softly, the moral of the story distilled into a single, it makes you a servant. He forgot that. After a few more pleasantries, she hung up the phone. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the past months finally lifting. David squeezed her shoulder gently. It's over, he said. No, she replied, turning to look at him, her eyes clear and focused. She gestured to the stacks of files on her new desk, each one representing a different city, a different judge, a different cry for help. It's just beginning. She turned back to her work, the quiet professional, the guardian at the gate, ready for the next fight. The battle was won, but the war for justice was eternal. What an incredible story of patience. Aliyah Vance proved that the most powerful weapon against a corrupt system is the truth, wielded by someone with unbreakable resolve. Judge Thorne thought he was untouchable, a king in his own courtroom, but karma came for him, wearing the quiet disguise of a court reporter. He learned the hard way, If you loved watching this arrogant bully get exactly what he deserved, please smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel reach more people who enjoy these satisfying stories. Share this video with anyone who loves a satisfying story of karma being served cold. We all know someone who needs to see a villain get their public comeuppance. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our daily drama and revenge stories. We post new videos every single day, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have done if you were in Alia's shoes? Could you have stayed silent for so long, watching the person you love go through that, all for the sake of a greater justice? I can't wait to read your thoughts. See you in the next video.